Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Thursday, October 2nd, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, the latest as both sides point fingers amid a government shutdown, plus how tariffs could impact races next year, and we remember Jane Goodall. Amid this week's government shutdown, the finger-pointing continued on Capitol Hill yesterday, and we got some of the White House's perspective. I caught up with USA Today White House correspondent Francesca Chambers for the latest. Thanks for hopping on, Francesca.
Thanks, Taylor.
So how is Vice President J.D. Vance taking center stage here?
Taylor, ever since it became clear that the government was likely to go into a shutdown because President Trump and congressional leaders couldn't reach a deal at the White House on Monday, it's been J.D. Vance who has been taking a very public-facing role in messaging the White House's position on this. It was the vice president who came out at the White House after that meeting alongside Republican leadership, House Speaker Mike Johnson, as well as Senate Majority Leader John Thune, and took questions from reporters at the White House. And then at the White House again on Wednesday, hours after the government went into a shutdown, the vice president made a surprise appearance at the White House podium to take questions from reporters then too.
Well, as for President Trump, he said that vast numbers of federal workers could be terminated. How is he framing this really in the first 24 hours after the shutdown?
Well, he's been saying that for the last several days, and really the White House has been warning that for more than a week now, with the Office of Management and Budget saying that this was something that they could do, which is fire federal workers and not bring them back when they would normally be furloughed and then brought back afterwards if they were working on projects that didn't align with the president's priorities. So now you've seen the president say in recent days that a shutdown could actually be an opportunity for Republicans to defund projects that they simply do not like.
Well, Francesca, you're there in Washington. I mean, how else was this shutdown playing out politically the day after the federal government closed shop?
Well, building on what the president said, then you saw Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, saying on the first day of the shutdown that he talked to President Trump at great length about this, and that while a shutdown would be damaging for the American people who depend on government services, he too said that it can provide an opportunity to do what he described as downsize the scope and scale of government, which is something that Republicans have been wanting to do. And so that's where you now hear Republicans really rallying around, is this threat to lay off federal workers en masse, hoping that it will push Democrats. Now, Democrats, on the other hand, are saying that Republicans are to blame for this shutdown. They're the ones saying that President Trump should be willing to make some sort of deal with Democrats over the health care benefits that they have been pushing Republicans to include in the bill. They want a couple things, which include the extension of Obamacare subsidies, but they're also asking for Medicaid as well as other health care benefits that were cut in the tax and spend legislation over the summer that Republicans passed. They say that they want those re-added in. And oh, by the way, Taylor, they're also asking to restrict the president's power to unilaterally cut funds that House and Senate lawmakers have already appropriated to certain projects.
All right, lots of the expected finger pointing. I mean, what is some of the immediate practical impact, Francesca, for the American people after this shutdown?
Some of that is still shaking out because individual agencies and departments are responsible for saying what they will and won't shut down and what they will and will not consider essential. Some of them have said, Taylor, that they're borrowing from other pots of money or that they have leftover funds that they can use to keep operations going for at least another couple days. Now, what you will see is that Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, the U.S. Postal Service, all of those things will remain open and on schedule because they're not funded by money that comes out of the same bill that Republicans are discussing on Capitol Hill. The U.S. Postal Service is actually self-funded. But there are plenty of other things, including museums like the Smithsonian or national parks, that could be affected. And while TSA workers and air traffic controllers are considered essential, they won't be paid during this time. They'll receive back pay later. And that could lead to folks calling in to work, as well as there being long lines at the airports disrupting travel.
All right. Excellent breakdown for us as always. Francesca Chambers covers the White House for USA Today. Thank you, Francesca.
Thanks, Taylor.
FBI Director Kash Patel announced he is ending the Bureau's partnership with the Anti-Defamation League, saying he disliked former FBI Director James Comey's approving comments about the Jewish advocacy group. Patel said in a social media post yesterday that Comey wrote love letters to the ADL and embedded FBI agents with them. He accused the organization of spying on Americans without providing specific details. The Anti-Defamation League, which describes itself as the leading anti-hate organization in the world with a mission to stop the defamation of Jewish people and secure justice for all, said in a statement that it has deep respect for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and law enforcement officers at all levels across the country. In 2014, in a self-described love letter to the League, Comey praised its work on a variety of issues, including anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim prejudice, and terrorist threats. Concerns from farmers about President Donald Trump's tariffs could impact 2026 races. I spoke with USA Today White House correspondent Bart Jansen for a closer look. As always, thanks for hopping on, Bart.
Thanks for having me.
So, Bart, what are some of the main industry concerns around tariffs at this point?
The major thrust is that if you set a tariff on another country, that's going to make the imports coming in more expensive, so that for a car maker, for example, the parts all get more expensive. And so that's going to drive up the cost to produce the car. And then the question is, how much can you pass along to the customer? In addition, other countries might set up retaliatory tariffs. And so then they start charging us more for the stuff we're sending them. That's what I found with, say, soybean farmers, for example. Soybeans are the largest agricultural export that we have. Half of our soybean exports go to China. They have a huge demand trying to feed their pigs in China. And so it's a huge market. But in retaliation to the U.S. tariffs, China is now charging an extra 34% on American soybeans. And so soybean farmers are telling me that they have sold not one soybean from this fall's harvest yet to China because the prices competitively are too high. Instead, Brazil and other countries are stepping in to sell soybeans to China.
Bart, you cover the White House. Really, what is the argument from Trump or the administration at this point?
Well, Trump continues to say that tariffs are terrific, that they're going to make the country rich, and that if he had to surrender them, that it would be a huge setback for the country. The estimate from a congressional office is that they're going to offset the deficit something like $4 trillion over the next decade. We're expected to raise at least $3.3 trillion over that period. And then because we'd be paying less on debt, that you get another $700 billion knocked off the deficit too. So a huge financial benefit if the tariffs stay in place. And in addition, because the tariffs, he set rates that are high enough that they really caught the attention of these other countries, that countries have come to the negotiating table. And so he has negotiated deals with the United Kingdom and Japan and South Korea, and other countries continue to negotiate. In the meantime, he just set tariff rates. And so the money has been rolling in. The question is how much antagonism that creates in the other countries, and of course, whether it drives up prices here. The Supreme Court has scheduled arguments on November 5th that he's not justified in collecting the tariffs.
Well, looking toward next year, Bart, how might tariffs affect the 2026 midterms? These are just over a year away. What are political experts saying on this point?
Well, part of the reason I got onto this story was just the idea that Congress used to vote on trade deals. They're not voting on these deals that Trump has been negotiating. And I thought, well, how did that happen? This is part of a process that began before Trump got into office. We used to have a thing called Trade Promotion Authority, and what it was called Fast Track. Basically, it set up a way for Congress to sort of set objectives of what they wanted in trade talks, and then the president would carry that out by negotiating with the other country, and then you'd have a deal, and then Congress would vote up or down on the entire deal. So Trade Promotion Authority expired in 2015, and it sort of left just an impasse about, well, what do we do now? Because if you had all members of Congress that could amend a trade agreement, you got 535 people who might have different ideas about how a deal could be cut. And it just doesn't sound to anybody like that would work. But they're basically the trade deals that Trump has been negotiating. They're not even voting just up or down on those. And that has led to a sharp partisan divide over that status. Basically, Republicans almost entirely are standing behind Trump. They say, hey, he's cutting the deals. These tariffs look like they're doing a good job for the US, at least so far. And so Republicans are standing behind Trump. Democrats are uniformly critical of him negotiating these deals. They say this is Congress's power to do and that they want to vote on it. As you look toward the 2026 congressional races, there are a bunch of open seats in states that depend a lot on trade. Iowa, Joni Ernst is retiring. In Michigan, Gary Peters is retiring. In North Carolina, Tom Tillis is retiring. And so you've got these states where you could have competitive races or at least open seat races where tariffs might become part of the political debate because it could depend a lot on how much they are either buying or selling from other countries, or the ripple effect on how many jobs are won or lost through that trade. Nobody's exactly sure how that shakes out yet, but it is expected it could be a political factor in those races as part of the broader economic debate that'll happen in 2026.
Bart Jansen covers the White House for USA Today. We'll post a link to this great story in today's show notes. I appreciate the time as always, Bart.
Thanks for having me.
Jane Goodall has died. The legendary chimpanzee researcher was in California on a cross-country speaking tour and died of natural causes. She began studying chimps in what would become Gombe Stream National Park in Tanzania in the early 1960s, and she skyrocketed to fame thanks in part to a National Geographic documentary about her fieldwork while using her science celebrity status over the years to advance conservation efforts for chimpanzees and other endangered species through her foundation. Goodall was a pioneer in her field, both as a female scientist in the mid-20th century and for her work studying the behavior of primates. She upended scientific norms of her era, giving chimps names instead of numbers, observing their distinct personalities, and bringing their family relationships and emotions into her work. She also found that they use tools. In 2003, she was appointed a Dame of the British Empire, and earlier this year, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Jane Goodall was 91. And Jews around the world are marking Yom Kippur. The Day of Atonement and holiest day in the Jewish faith began last night and ends this evening. Coming up later today, once known simply as a gossip guru, Charlemagne the God still gets the tea. But in recent years, the 47-year-old has emerged as one of America's most prominent political pundits, beefing with President Donald Trump and predicting Joe Biden's 2024 downfall.
Sometimes we feel like we have to talk about pop culture or politics, and perhaps the reason that he resonates with everyday Americans is because he talks about both, like we do at our dinner table every night.
That was USA Today politics reporter Jay Stahl, who recently sat down with Charlemagne to talk about the politics of the moment and how his personal history has shaped his perspectives. You can hear my colleague Dana Taylor's conversation with Jay right here on this feed, beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern later today. And thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and you can email us at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.